Hi there, Dave Rawlings here with the London Longsword Academy, and today I'd like to have a look at the Dorothea Dussack by Landsknecht Emporium. Now, Landsknecht, when they started, were turning out really quite rustic finished material. So by that I mean that quite often the fittings were a little bit rough and ready, weren't particularly tight fitting necessarily. They were always very solid, but there was quite often gaps and there was little work finishes and things like that. And that's something that I'm glad to say has improved as they've gone on. And recently they started working on the Dussack. Now you may have seen that I did a review of the Wolfland Dussack, which was absolutely terrible. It's just an absolute iron bar. And it's a real pleasure to see something like this come onto the market. So there's a few features I want to run through on this. Now, first of all, I want to talk about the shell. And the shell is really, really good. It's good and thick. It feels very, very solid, but it's not overly weighty either. And then this brings us, again, has this slight backside to it as well. And then the thumb ring, which is lovely, but I will talk about this a little bit more in a minute. On the tip of the sword, you have a genuine swelling, so it thins down throughout the blade and then swells out again at the tip, which is always nice to see when people do this. There is a reasonable degree of flex to this. However, flex is not my favourite friend in fencing. Control is my favourite friend in fencing. And I think this is always something we need to bear in mind, particularly when we're using shorter items. You get hit in the wrong place with a thrust and it doesn't flex quite as much as you want. Yeah, control is always going to be better in my opinion. Now, that said, it has, as I say, got pretty reasonable flex. I could push that a lot more, but I don't want to. Okay, so it has a little bit of a fuller towards the edge, and this is quite nice. It keeps it quite thick on the back, and it definitely, as I say, thins out towards the middle, and then you're thicker here, thicker stock, comes down, thins out in the middle, and then thickens up again at the end. You have a good sturdy knuckle bow. There is, I think this is very unlikely that this knuckle bow is going to be going anywhere, and that appears to be welded independently to the guard as well, okay, to the shell. Now, the pommel, good and sturdy. And again, that's anchored very, very solidly. One little quibble I would have is, if I'm being hypercritical, is the leather working on this is not fantastic. It is solid, it's very well anchored, there's no movement in the leather and there's no movement in the wood of the handle, but the bulbing here is not finished particularly magnificently, but that's a small quibble. Now, the big issue I have on this, and it's not a major one, I anticipate that this has been made for people with gloves, but I don't think you should assume that people want to be wearing gloves when they're using this. So with the thumb ring here, the edges of the thumb ring are pretty damn sharp, and my feeling is if I'm going to use this again without gloves, this is going to really dig into my finger over a period, into my thumb over a period of time. And even if I'm wearing gloves, that's going to be wear on my gloves that doesn't necessarily need to be there. So it is exceptionally nice. It kind of feels, unfortunately, that some of the shell has got more of a smooth finish than this ring has, and that's a little bit of a strange thing. So I'd like to see that improved. I'll probably run a file around that or wrap it in leather myself, but it just feels that if I'm holding this here, it's going to rub and it's going to cause finger and thumb pain, and it's also going to damage any gloves I've got. However, this is a seriously impressive piece of kit. It handles very well. I was surprised how light it felt when I picked up the package. Now, they list it as being 1,060 grams, and this came in a little bit heavier, I think at 1,157. But it handles absolutely fantastically. So it's a beautiful, beautiful sword. It's not a lump like the Wolfland. I'll put the specs on below. Seriously, seriously nice piece of kit from Landsknecht Emporium, let down by the roughness of this ring and slightly by the leather working. That could be finished a little bit nicer, but for €330 I believe it is, it's still exceptionally nice. Very well done. Take care. So as I mentioned before, here the grip doesn't look too bad. It's nice and cleanly finished around here, but then as soon as I turn it over like so, hopefully you can see a little bit more that you have this bulbing and a pretty feelable overlap, and it's not very, very much, but it is something I'd like to draw your attention to. Then the thumb ring, and this really is quite sharp to the touch, and you can see that this looks a bit unfinished. And again, I'm quite surprised because this is even in places, not so much here, but here it's smoother than it is where it's going to be in contact with your thumb, around about here. And that's a very strange oversight, so I was a little bit bewildered to see that, because everything else really is done quite well. The shell, as I say, is very well shaped here and well finished, and it is sturdy. I like that a lot. And then, as I say, you have this fuller that goes along the true edge, the thinning out of the blade, and then, as I say, it bulbs out towards the tip. And this does give it some nice momentum. It's not heavy, it's not a bar, and this is something that I'm very proud of what they've done with this. It's very cool. And then this nice little clip on the end. Okay, so I think it's a fantastic piece of kit. The only thing, in my opinion, that lets this down is that aspect of the thumb ring being rough. But otherwise, a very, very good sword. Thank you, Landsknecht.